Have you ever heard an Israeli child speak Tagalog better than a Filipino who just arrived in Israel for the first time? It sounds almost impossible, almost like something someone would exaggerate just to catch your attention. But what if I told you that this strange moment is not rare at all? In fact, it is becoming a quiet reality, tucked inside small apartments, neighborhood playgrounds, and the quiet lives of migrant families who never imagined they would shape the sound of a distant nation. The moment that opened my eyes happened on a warm afternoon in Holon. I watched a little boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a faded blue shirt and holding a soccer ball, run up to his caretaker and shout in perfectly natural Tagalog, not broken, not mixed with Hebrew, pure flowing Tagalog that carried the rhythm of childhood. His caretaker laughed, surprised, maybe even slightly embarrassed, as if the roles had somehow reversed. The child tugged at her shirt and said a full sentence so confidently that even I paused. You know how children sound when they speak the language they dream in. That is exactly how he sounded. And the caretaker, a Filipina in her late 30s named Lara, later told me that the boy had started speaking Tagalog before she even taught him. He had simply absorbed it from the daily rhythm of her voice, her stories, her songs while doing chores, the soft phrases she used to comfort him whenever he had a nightmare. It was as if the language had slipped into his life, the way sunlight slips through curtains, without announcement, without permission, just naturally. That was my micro-shock. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly turning my expectations upside down. You do not expect to find parts of the Philippines living so vividly inside Israeli homes, carried by children who have never set foot on Philippine soil. Yet there it was, unfolding in front of me as casually as an afternoon conversation. And that brings us to the journey waiting ahead. A story shaped by people like Lara, people who leave their homeland to care for strangers, yet end up weaving something unexpected between cultures. We often hear about overseas Filipino workers, but usually through numbers or headlines, rarely through the soft, everyday details that show just how deeply they influence the countries they work in. The person at the heart of this story is a woman named Mara. She arrived in Israel 15 years ago with a single luggage bag, $200, and a quiet promise to her mother back home that she would stay only 2 years. And yet, those 2 years stretched into something far more complicated and far more meaningful than she ever imagined. When I first spoke with her, she told me she never planned to teach anyone Tagalog. She did not even think of herself as someone who could influence another culture. She simply wanted to work, send money home, and keep her head down. But life has a strange way of pulling us into roles we never rehearsed for. Her first employer was an elderly Israeli woman named Dina, who had survived more than one war and carried the kind of silence that only people with long memories can hold. At first, they barely spoke. Mara was shy. Dina was cautious. But one morning, Mara was humming an old Filipino lullaby while preparing breakfast, and she noticed Dina listening with a look that was neither curiosity nor nostalgia, but something softer, something like relief. It was through moments like that, Mara said, that she slowly realized language does not spread because we plan it. It spreads because we live it, because we share stories without meaning to, because we leave traces of ourselves everywhere we go. And this is where our story begins. With a simple question: how did Filipino, a language born from centuries of mixing, island life, and resilience, become one of the most quietly influential languages in Israel? How did it find its way into playgrounds, nursing homes, and the hearts of families who never expected to embrace it? To understand that, we have to follow Mara. Her journey, her quiet fears, her unexpected friendships, and the way her life slowly shaped the world around her in ways she never imagined. Mara once told me that the strangest changes in her life never arrived with fanfare. They slipped in through ordinary days, disguised as small interactions that only later revealed their weight. Her second year in Israel felt exactly like that. She had already grown comfortable with the rhythm of her work, the predictable schedule of meals, medication, and short walks to the small garden behind the apartment building where Dina liked to sit in the late afternoons. Yet beneath that routine, something else was unfolding. Something neither she nor Dina spoke about directly, but both of them felt. There was a day when Dina looked at her and asked a question in slow, careful Tagalog. It was not perfect, but it was unmistakably Tagalog. She said it with the kind of effort that made Mara freeze for a moment. It was a simple question, "Have you eaten?" But the tenderness behind it stunned her. That moment felt like an invisible bridge had quietly formed between them. A bridge built not of responsibility or employment, but of two people slowly learning to live inside each other's worlds. When she told me this, she laughed softly and said she did not know whether to feel proud or afraid. Proud that Dina was trying to connect. Afraid of what that connection meant, because it hinted at something deeper than her role as a caregiver. It hinted at belonging. And belonging, for someone living far from home, can feel both comforting and dangerous. It means part of your heart starts planting itself into a place where you were never meant to stay long. But what she did not know then was that countless other Filipino workers were experiencing the same quiet shift. In Tel Aviv, she would overhear Tagalog words exchanged by Israeli teenagers as if they had grown up with them. Words like salamat or sandali were slipping into casual conversations, not as foreign curiosities, but as familiar sounds. Some learned from nannies, some from caregivers, some from neighbors who had become like extended family. No one planned it. It simply happened because language always gravitates toward the people who make us feel safe. One day, while accompanying Dina to a community event, Mara met a young couple whose daughter ran up to her shouting "Ate Mara" with pure joy. The girl was maybe 6. She had soft brown curls and bright eyes that sparkled when she spoke. And she did speak, in Tagalog so enthusiastic that even adults could not help smiling. Her parents explained that her former nanny had been Filipina. When she left to work in another city, the little girl cried for days. To comfort her, they kept speaking the words the nanny had taught her, and soon those words became part of their home too. That night, Mara walked back to her apartment with a feeling she could not describe. Something warm, something heavy, something like realizing you are leaving an imprint on a place without meaning to. She whispered to herself that maybe the Philippines was not confined to its islands. Maybe it traveled wherever its people went. Not just in their labor, but in their laughter, their tenderness, their resilience. As her relationship with Dina deepened, Mara noticed something else. Dina began repeating small Tagalog phrases whenever she was anxious. Maga salitang pampalubaglub, as Mara called them. Comforting words. Words that held her together through long nights of missing home. To hear them echoed by someone from a different culture felt like standing in front of a mirror and seeing two reflections instead of one. There was one evening, quiet and slow, when Dina woke from a dream and did not recognize the room. Her breath quickened, her hands trembled. Mara held her gently and whispered in Tagalog, telling her she was safe. And in that dimly lit room, something unexpected happened. Dina relaxed. Not because she understood the exact meaning of every word, but because the sound itself calmed her. It reminded Mara of how her mother used to soothe her during storms back home. How strange, she thought, that a language born on distant shores could soften fear in someone who had never touched those waters. And little by little, Mara began to understand something profound. Language does not belong to a nation as tightly as we think it does. It belongs to whoever holds it with sincerity. It belongs to whoever needs it in a moment of fear or love. And because so many Filipinos had entered Israeli homes, bringing not just service but compassion, their language began taking root in unexpected places. By the end of her 4th year, Mara no longer wondered why Tagalog was becoming so familiar across Israel. She felt it. She lived it. And yet, the most transformative moment of her journey was still ahead, a moment that would challenge her beliefs about home, identity, and the invisible ways cultures reshape each other. The moment that would make her ask the question she had never dared to voice. Was she still only a visitor in this land, or had life quietly made her part of it? There is a moment in every long journey when a person suddenly realizes they are not the same as when they began. Mara felt that shift one late evening during her 10th year in Israel, when the apartment was quiet and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the room. She had just finished preparing Dina's medication for the next morning, a routine she could now do almost without thinking. But that night, when she sat down at the small kitchen table, she felt a strange heaviness settle on her shoulders, as if something long unspoken had finally made its way to the surface. It started earlier that day when she walked with Dina through the park near the apartment. They moved slowly, taking their time, letting the breeze carry off some of the weight of age and memory. A young boy ran past them, chasing a bright red ball. When he tripped, the elderly woman beside him rushed forward and called out in Tagalog, not an approximation of the language, not a single borrowed word, but an entire sentence spoken with instinct rather than effort. Mara stopped mid-step. Dina looked at her with gentle recognition, as if she knew exactly what Mara had heard. That boy was not Filipino. His mother was not Filipino, but the language fell from her lips as naturally as her own breath. She noticed the way the words settled around the child, softening his cry, pulling him back into safety. And in that small moment, Mara felt something shift in her understanding of the world. It was as if she had been walking through life with a quiet assumption she had never questioned. The assumption that Tagalog belonged only to her people, that it was a piece of home she carried alone. But seeing that mother comfort her child in Tagalog shattered that belief in the gentlest way possible. When they returned home, Mara prepared tea while Dina rested on the couch. Suddenly Dina looked up and said a short sentence in Tagalog, so casual and so warm that Mara had to sit down before her knees gave way. Dina did not even notice the impact. She simply asked about the tea, as if speaking Tagalog had become an ordinary part of her day. It was then that Mara understood how deeply intertwined their lives had become. Dina had absorbed her language, not through lessons or intention, but through years of shared silence, shared meals, shared worries, shared human fragility. And now, Tagalog lived in that home too. Later that night, as Mara sat alone at the kitchen table, she thought about all the moments that had led to this point. She remembered the early days when she felt like her presence in Israel was temporary, fragile, almost invisible. She remembered telling herself she would leave as soon as her siblings finished school, as soon as she saved enough money, as soon as she stopped feeling guilty for being so far from home. But as each year passed, something unexpected happened. Israel stopped being simply the country she worked in. It became a place where her voice mattered, her words mattered, her culture mattered. She realized she was not an outsider standing at the edge of someone else's world. She was part of the quiet fabric of it. And so were thousands of other Filipinos who had arrived with the same fears, the same hopes, the same longing to support their families while trying to protect their hearts from attachment. Yet whether they intended to or not, they had planted something in this land, something tender and lasting. The next week, Mara visited a community center where several caregivers gathered on their day off. She arrived to the sound of laughter and chatter that felt like stepping into a small pocket of the Philippines. But mixed into that familiar warmth were the voices of Israeli children who had come with their guardians. They played together, switching between Hebrew and Tagalog as if the two languages were siblings, not strangers. One girl ran past Mara and greeted her in Tagalog before continuing her game. Another tugged at her sleeve to show her a drawing labeled with a mix of both languages. Mara felt her breath catch. She recognized that these children were carrying something unexpected into the future, not out of obligation but out of affection. For a long moment, Mara simply watched them, and she could almost see the future unfolding quietly through their laughter. A future where Tagalog lived in Israeli homes, not as a borrowed phrase or an exotic curiosity, but as a language of comfort, of childhood, of family. As she walked home later, she found herself whispering the question that had always lingered in the back of her mind. Had Filipino truly become Israel's second language? But the answer no longer felt like a matter of statistics or official recognition. It felt like something deeper, something lived rather than declared. Because in every household where a Filipino worker had soothed a frightened child, or comforted an elderly parent, or shared a song on a tired evening, Tagalog had quietly taken root. It had become a language of safety, of care, of human connection. And what other language, she thought, could be more powerful than the one spoken in moments when people feel most fragile? When Mara unlocked the apartment door, Dina called her name in a soft Tagalog greeting that floated across the room like a warm embrace. In that instant, Mara understood the truth she had been circling for years. Filipino was not becoming Israel's second language because of policy or politics. It was becoming so because of people like her. People who carried their culture in the gentle work of caring for others. People who left pieces of home in the hearts of those who welcomed them in return. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet pride rising. Not loud, not boastful, just steady. Because without meaning to, she had helped weave a bridge between two nations. A bridge built one word, one kindness, one shared moment at a time. If this story moved something in you, even a little, take a moment to breathe it in. Because somewhere out there, in a quiet apartment or a sunlit playground, another Filipino caregiver is shaping a tiny piece of Israel's future without even realizing it. And if you want more stories like this, stories that reveal how small acts can change entire cultures, then stay close. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to feel a bit of hope today, and let your voice join ours. Every view, every comment, every listener becomes part of this growing bridge between worlds. Let's keep walking it together.